about to start West Side Story. We're tuning. I have my trumpet with me. It's so exciting! Not really. It's gonna be a lot of fun. Hopefully it'll be better than the assembly. We're gonna start with the prologue, so I better get my straight mute in.
Start with the prologue.
We're gonna start with the straight mute. Take a look at the background. Look, it's buildings. Isn't that cool? It's like buildings on the curtains. Jets. We're Jets. We're gonna have a good time doing show number 1 of West Side Story. That was me as a senior in high school. It was then that I really started to love this timeless tale. And now we're here. If you were to tell me back then that one day I would be talking about Steven Spielberg's remake of this story, I would have said you were crazy. So let's do it. West Side Story. I just said that. From legendary filmmaker Steven Spielberg comes the second film adaptation of the 1957 Broadway musical, which in turn is based on William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. 60 years ago, West Side Story got its first film adaptation, which won quite a few Oscars, and now I feel like history might just repeat itself. So West Side Story takes place in the 1950s in the west side of Manhattan, New York, and we have two rival teenage street gangs, the Jets, who are white, and the Sharks, who are Puerto Rican. They can't stand each other, but among these two groups, a former Jet named Tony, played by Ansel Elgort, falls in love with a young Puerto Rican girl named Maria, played by newcomer Rachel Zegler. So they have their love story going on, which causes major tension among these two groups, hence the Romeo and Juliet of it all. And now we have our new take on a timeless classic. And I'm gonna try my best not to compare this movie to the 1961 film, which I know very well, because I want to talk about this movie as if it were its own movie, as if it were the first film adaptation of the show. However, I will not succeed, so I'm just forewarning you now. That being said, this is one of the best movies of the year. Let's talk about the cast, because the acting all around is phenomenal. Ansel Elgort as Tony brings that Ansel Elgort charm that he brings to every role he does, which is, he's just a guy. That's always the vibe he gives off. He's no one special, he's not some big brawler guy. I mean, sure, he's a former gangster, but the character of Tony in the beginning of this story is in a new, vulnerable place in his life. He wants to move on from where he was before. He wants to be a new person. And I could tell that Ansel Elgort was not exactly a trained singer, but he did sound really good in this movie. Yeah, I will say, unlike the 1961 film, each of the cast members who played the characters, they actually did their own singing. There I go, making a comparison. Well, I tried. So now I'm gonna talk about Rachel Zegler as Maria. America, say hello to your new sweetheart. I mean, not only does she have an amazing soprano voice, she hits those high notes like a champ, but she chews scenery. This talented young lady is a breakthrough. Her acting is absolutely great. And of course, she has that very likable quality that Maria is supposed to have. Just the camera absolutely loves her. And Ansel Elgort and Rachel Zegler have excellent chemistry on screen. You so want to root for Tony and Maria. Then there's Ariana DeBose as Anita. She was awesome. We've seen in other things like Hamilton or The Prom that she's a really good actress, and I'm glad we finally get to see that on the big screen, since I'm pretty sure this is her theatrical movie debut. Not a bad first. David Alvarez as Bernardo, who is Maria's older brother, he also did a really good job, because Bernardo in this movie is a tough guy, and he really sells that. When he's pissed, you know it. I wouldn't face the dude, because he comes across as quite scary in a couple scenes. But folks, now I'm gonna give a shout out, because I cannot talk about this movie without talking about Rita Moreno. EGOT winner, actress, legend extraordinaire. She plays the Doc role in this movie. She plays Doc's widow, Valentina, and she's absolutely fantastic. I mean, just seeing her on the big screen at all, to me, is a real treat. But the way she interacts with Tony, the dialogue they have, she really is a loving figure, but herself being Puerto Rican, she's not afraid to throw in her 2 cents on this whole situation. And I don't know, maybe she'll get nominated for Best Supporting Actress, as she, in fact, won that title for playing Anita in the 1961 film. I'm just saying, that would be something. Now, what you gotta know about this remake is that this is a more realistic version of West Side Story, in every sense of the word. Starting with the dialogue. For those of you who have not seen the 1961 film, as much as I love it, the dialogue in there can be seen as kinda campy at times. Yeah, maybe a little dated. What this remake does is it takes all the campiness out of the story and replaces it with brutal realism. I mean, the scenes are more or less the same, but the dialogue is completely different. It's more realistic, at least realistic as we see it now. And when I say this movie is brutal, I mean brutal. This movie is rated PG-13, but at some points I was like, this movie's pushing the boundaries of PG-13. In fact, there's a part of me that's curious as to what this movie would have been like if it were rated R. Because with today's movie making technology and what they can get away with now, there are a couple of pretty violent moments. And if the brutality isn't physical violence, the brutality is in the dialogue, or just the intensity of a scene. In fact, that's one of the strongest things about this movie is it gets so intense. And you really feel it. So big props to that. Now, I will say, for those of you who don't speak Spanish, there will be quite a few scenes where you're like, I have no idea what these characters are talking about because they're speaking complete fluent Spanish and there are no translating subtitles. So if you're not fluent in Spanish, you're gonna be left sitting there like, I have no idea what they're talking about, because that's how I was. I was like, these characters could be talking about the price of tea in China, and I wouldn't know the difference. I mean, granted, the emotion comes across, and if you know the story of West Side Story, it's not that big a deal, but I just can't deny that I did feel a disconnect when I couldn't understand what these characters were saying. And I would call this a complaint I have about the movie, but after hearing Spielberg's reasoning for this, I can't argue with him. The reason he has Spanish dialogue without subtitles is because he didn't want to give English power over Spanish. He wanted both sides to have equal ground, because that's this story. After hearing that argument, I was like, okay. Again, it adds to the realism of this take of the story. And then, of course, there are those classic scenes that I love West Side Story for having. And man, just seeing them brought to life on the big screen, like the classic moment where Tony meets Maria at the dance at the gym, I teared up during that scene. Because it's such a staple, classic Broadway moment. Like, it doesn't get more classic than this. I honestly consider myself privileged to have seen this on the big screen. Because the word that came to my head to describe it was magical. It was a magical feeling. And oh yeah, at a couple of points in the movie, I was crying. Yeah, it happened twice, but that might just be because of my sentimental attachment to West Side Story. That plus the masterful quality in which this movie was made, you can just tell by watching it. This movie was made with love. The cinematography is awesome, the choreography and the dance numbers was awesome. The music, oh my god. Folks, this is the music of West Side Story, originally composed by Leonard Bernstein and legend Stephen Sondheim. Rest in peace, you beautiful man. All the classic West Side Story music is here. It's a brilliant soundtrack. The orchestra is conducted by Gustavo Dudamel, who is pretty brilliant in his own right, and it's just beautiful. I will say a couple of times I was like, yeah, these actors are not singing live, they're lip syncing, because the way they're moving and dancing, I'm like, yeah, they can't do that and sing well at the same time. So some of it was lip synced, but some of it was not. Now, other times I was like, no, that sounds live. That's good. Again, I'm glad film adaptations of Broadway musicals are catching on to that trend. It's about time. So in the end, Steven Spielberg's remake of West Side Story is phenomenal. If you're a fan of the original show, you'll love it. If you're a fan of the 1961 film, you'll love it. Or if this is your very first experience with West Side Story, you'll love it. The acting is fantastic. All the emotions of the story hit you like a ton of bricks. The set design, the wardrobe, the choreography, the lighting, the cinematography. Steven Spielberg and his crew of thousands worked with love in their hearts on this movie, and it's easy to see. It's right in front of your face. And all of it topped with a relevant social message at its core. For West Side Story, I will say, go see this movie right now. I can't wait to watch this movie again. I already bought my ticket. So, Steven Spielberg's West Side Story. Have you seen it yet? What do you think about it? Are you a fan of the 1961 film? How do you compare this remake to the 1961 film? Or was this your very first experience with Tony and Maria? If so, what did you think? Whatever you think, go ahead and leave a comment. And of course, thank you for subscribing. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go put together my spoiler talk for this movie. Forewarning you now, it's gonna be a long one, but it's gonna be passionate, so be here for that. Peace!